relationship between Japan and China is steeped in historical trauma, defined by deep political divisions, and shaped by modern economic and military competition. The tragic killing of a Japanese schoolboy in China in 2024 has reignited nationalist sentiment and brought into sharp focus the precarious state of these two nations' relationship. To truly understand the complexity of this dynamic, we must first delve into the history that continues to haunt both nations, analyze the modern-day factors contributing to escalating tensions, and explore the potential future of this dangerous rivalry. The animosity between Japan and China is rooted in over a century of conflict, particularly in the early 20th century. The 1931 Mukden incident, when Japanese forces staged an explosion to justify their invasion of Manchuria, marked a turning point in the relationship. This led to the establishment of the puppet state Manchukuo and laid the groundwork for the Second Sino-Japanese War, 1937 to 1945. The atrocities committed by Japanese forces, most notably the Nanjing Massacre, in which over 300,000 Chinese civilians were killed, have left an indelible scar on Chinese national memory. Even today, the Japanese government's perceived reluctance to fully acknowledge or atone for these war crimes remains a major source of friction between the two nations. During the post-war era, Japan underwent a transformation, embracing democratic governance and becoming an economic powerhouse, while China was in the throes of a communist revolution under Mao Zedong. These diverging paths laid the foundation for modern tensions as the ideological and political chasm between the two countries grew. However, despite these wounds, by the 1970s, there was a thawing of relations. In 1972, Japan and China established diplomatic relations, and trade ties began to flourish. Japan became one of the largest investors in China's industrial development. Yet, despite these economic connections, underlying tensions remained, particularly over historical grievances and territorial disputes. One of the most contentious issues between Japan and China today is the territorial dispute over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. These uninhabited islands, located in the East China Sea, are claimed by both Japan and China, though they have been under Japanese administrative control since 1972. The islands are strategically significant as they sit near important shipping lanes and are believed to contain valuable oil and gas reserves. In 2012, the Japanese government nationalized 3 of the islands, a move that prompted widespread protests across China. Chinese demonstrators attacked Japanese businesses, and diplomatic relations soured. This incident exemplified how unresolved historical issues and nationalistic fervor can quickly escalate into political and even military crises. This dispute has also drawn in external powers, particularly the United States, which has a security treaty with Japan. The U.S. has affirmed that the Senkaku Islands fall under the scope of this treaty, meaning that any Chinese military action against the islands would prompt U.S. involvement. This has led to increased military posturing in the region, with both Japan and China ramping up their naval and air forces. In the 21st century, nationalism has become a powerful force in both Japan and China, often inflaming the tensions between the two nations. In China, the ruling Communist Party has long used nationalism as a tool to consolidate power and distract from domestic issues. The government frequently invokes the Century of Humiliation, the period from the mid-19th to mid-20th century when China was subjected to foreign domination and exploitation, including by Japan, as a rallying cry for national unity. Similarly, in Japan, a resurgence of nationalism has emerged, particularly under the leadership of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Abe's government pushed for a reinterpretation of Japan's pacifist constitution to allow for a greater military role. In 2021, Japan announced plans to double its defense budget, and by 2024, Japan had positioned itself as a more assertive regional power. This military buildup has not gone unnoticed by China, which views Japan's actions as a threat to its own security and regional dominance. Chinese President Xi Jinping has made it clear that China will not tolerate what it perceives as Japanese aggression, particularly in relation to Taiwan. As both nations continue to expand their military capabilities, the risk of accidental or intentional conflict increases dramatically. The 2024 killing of a Japanese schoolboy in Shenzhen, China, has once again brought these tensions to the forefront. The boy was stabbed near his school by a Chinese assailant, and although authorities quickly apprehended the suspect, the incident has ignited nationalist fervor on both sides. In Japan, there have been widespread calls for the government to take a stronger stance against China and protect Japanese citizens abroad. The incident occurred on September 18th, a date that is highly significant in Chinese history, as it marks the anniversary of the Mukden incident, adding further symbolic weight to the tragedy. Japanese citizens have expressed anger and fear over the incident, with protests demanding that their government hold China accountable. In response, Japan has increased security around its embassies and businesses in China. The Chinese government, meanwhile, has expressed regret over the incident, but has been slow to offer any substantial apology, further exacerbating the situation.
凶手已经被当场抓获，案件目前还在进一步的调查中。中方将继续采取有效的措施，切实保护所有在华外国人的安全。
China's rise as a global power. Over the past 2 decades, China has emerged as the world's second-largest economy and a formidable military power. This has shifted the balance of power in East Asia, and Japan, once the dominant economic force in the region, now finds itself playing catch-up. China's assertive foreign policy, particularly in the South and East China Seas, has heightened concerns in Japan about its own security and regional influence. Taiwan. The status of Taiwan is another major flashpoint in Sino-Japanese relations. Japan, like most countries, does not formally recognize Taiwan as an independent nation, but it has strong economic and cultural ties to the island. Moreover, Japan's defense strategy is closely tied to the security of Taiwan, and any Chinese military action against Taiwan would likely draw in Japan. This has made the Taiwan issue a critical factor in Japan-China relations. U.S. involvement. The United States plays a crucial role in this dynamic. As Japan's closest ally, the U.S. has a significant military presence in Japan, and any conflict between Japan and China would almost certainly involve American forces. The U.S. has also increased its military presence in the Indo-Pacific region in response to China's growing assertiveness, further escalating tensions between China and Japan. Economic interdependence. Despite their political and military differences, Japan and China remain deeply economically intertwined. China is Japan's largest trading partner, and both countries rely on each other for various goods and services. This economic interdependence has, to some extent, acted as a stabilizing force in the relationship, but it also means that any serious conflict would have devastating economic consequences for both nations. The future of Japan-China relations remains uncertain. On the one hand, both nations have much to lose from a military conflict, and there are ongoing diplomatic efforts to resolve disputes, particularly over the Senkaku Diaoyu Islands. In recent years, there have been high-level talks between Japanese and Chinese officials, and both sides have expressed a willingness to avoid war. However, the rising tide of nationalism, coupled with increasing military posturing, suggests that the path to peace will not be easy. If China continues to assert its dominance in the region and Japan continues to build up its military, the risk of an accidental or intentional conflict will remain high. The murder of the Japanese schoolboy in 2024 may prove to be a tipping point in this delicate balance. It has reignited old wounds and sparked new calls for action in both countries. Whether this incident leads to further escalation or serves as a wake-up call for diplomacy remains to be seen.